Hello, and welcome to a video presentation on dividing decimals and integers by decimals. Here's what you'll learn: how to divide decimal numbers and integer numbers by decimals. To easily divide a decimal or integer number by a decimal, we're going to turn the decimal number that is outside of the box into an integer. Then our division problem is as simple as dividing a decimal or integer by an integer, and that's something we already know how to do. If you're not familiar with dividing decimals and integers by integers already, you may be interested in watching my video titled Dividing Decimals by Integers First. Dividing decimals and integers by decimals is a simple four-step process. Step 1. Set up your division problem. Step 2. Turn the decimal value in the divisor, that's the number outside the box, into an integer by moving its decimal point to the right. Step 3. Move the decimal point in the dividend, that's the number inside the box, the same number of places to the right. And step 4. Divide the numbers as you normally would for dividing decimals by integers. Now let's work a few examples together. Let's divide 18.24 by 5.7. And I'll start by writing down the problem: 18.24 divided by 5.7. Next, we need to turn 5.7 into an integer. We don't want decimals outside of the box on division. So we're going to do that by moving its decimal one place to the right to make it 57. Now look at 5.7, locate the decimal, and move it one place to the right. Now we have an integer, 57, outside the box. Movement of the decimal outside of the box requires the same movement of the decimal inside the box. So now we'll move that decimal one place to the right. 18.24 will become 182.4. So our problem is now 182.4 divided by 57. Let's go ahead and move all of this off to the side, and I'll make it look nicer by rewriting it before we start dividing. 182.4 divided by 57. Now let's go ahead and divide as you normally would. 57 doesn't go into 1, it doesn't go into 18, but it does go into 182. How many times? 3 times. 57 times 3 is 171, and we have a remainder of 11. So let's keep dividing by bringing the 4 down. 11 now becomes 114. How many times does 57 go into 114? 2 times. In fact, 57 times 2 is exactly 114. We have a remainder of 0, and we're done dividing. So now let's move the decimal inside the box straight up into your answer, just like that, and finally decide what sign goes on the answer. A positive divided by a positive is a positive, so our answer is 3.2. Now let's divide 14.2 by negative 1.25. Again, I'm going to start by writing down the problem, but I'm going to do it without adding the negative signs. We'll figure out the sign on our answer at the end. So let's write down 14.2 divided by 1.25. Next, we need to turn 1.25 into an integer, and we do that by moving its decimal 2 places to the right to make it 125. So take a look at 1.25, find its decimal, and move it twice. Moving it once gives us 12.5. Moving it again gives us 125. Again, movement of the decimal outside of the box requires the same movement of the decimal inside the box. So we'll move that decimal 2 places to the right, just like this, once and twice. Now, since the number under the box, 14.2, only had 1 decimal place, and we moved the decimal twice, we've created a gap, and we need to fill that gap with a 0. So put a 0 right after the 2, just like that. Now let's move all of this off to the side, and I'll rewrite the problem to make it look nicer. 1,420 now inside the box, and 125 outside the box. Now let's go ahead and divide. 125 doesn't go into 1, it doesn't go into 14, but it does go into 142. How many times? One time. 125 times 1 is 125. We now have a remainder of 17. Let's pull down our 0, and 17 becomes 170. How many times does 125 go into 170? Again, one time. 125 times 1 is 125. We now have a remainder of 45. And we don't have any more digits, but I want to keep dividing. So put a decimal after the number inside the box, just like that. Add another 0, and bring that 0 down to our remainder, so that 45 is now 450. How many times does 125 go into 450? 3 times. 125 times 3 is 375. So now we have another remainder, this time 75. Let's keep dividing. Just add another 0 up in the box, bring it down to your remainder. Now we have 750. How many times does 125 go into 750? 6 times. In fact, 125 times 6 is exactly 750. Now we end up with a remainder of 0, and we're done dividing. So let's move the decimal inside the box straight up into our answer, just like that, and let's figure out the sign on our answer. A positive divided by a negative is a negative. So our answer is negative 11.36. Now let's divide an integer, negative 12, by a decimal, negative 1.6. Let's start by writing down the problem. Again, I'm not going to add the negative signs at this point. We'll figure out the sign on our answer at the end. So I'll write down 12 divided by 1.6. Next, we need to turn 1.6 into an integer, and we do that by moving its decimal one place to the right. That will make the number 16. Now, movement of the decimal outside of the box requires the same movement of the decimal inside the box, so move that decimal one place to the right as well. But wait a minute, there doesn't appear to be a decimal inside the box on the number 12. What's going on here? Well, remember, every number does in fact have a decimal. So if you don't see one, one belongs at the end. So let's go ahead and place one at the end of the 12. Now we have a decimal we can move one place to the right, and we've created a gap that we're going to fill with a 0. Now let's move everything off to the side. I'll make it look nicer by rewriting it so we can start our division. I now have 120 divided by 16. And let's divide. 16 doesn't go into 1, it doesn't go into 12, but it does go into 120. How many times? If you said 7, very good, that's correct. 16 times 7 is 112. So we have a remainder of 8. I want to keep dividing, so let's go ahead and add that decimal point after the 120 again. Put a 0 after that, and bring that 0 down to our remainder to make it 80. How many times does 16 go into 80? 5 times. 16 times 5 is exactly 80. So now we have another remainder of 0, and we're done dividing this problem. Now move the decimal up into our answer, just like that. And we're going to figure out the sign on our answer. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. So our answer is just 7.5. Okay, let's wrap this lesson up with a word problem. During a trip to Disneyland, Jennifer drove 489 miles, and she used 16.3 gallons of gas. What is her car's gas mileage? In other words, how many miles per gallon does her car get? Now, to begin, we need to set up an expression that we can solve. And since we're looking for gas mileage, or miles per gallon, we know we have a division problem because per means divide. So let's set up miles in the numerator divided by gallons in the denominator. Now, we have a number in our problem for miles. It says that Jennifer drove 489 miles. So let's replace the word miles in the numerator with a number, 489. And we have a number for gallons, 16.3, that we can replace the word gallon in the denominator now with 16.3. Now we have an expression that we can solve. So let's go ahead and set up our problem. It's 489 divided by 16.3. Next, we need to turn 16.3 into an integer by moving its decimal point, and we have to move it one place to the right. That will make the number 163 outside the box. Now we move the decimal on the number inside the box one place to the right. Again, when you don't see a decimal, it's at the end. So we'll place a decimal after 489, and we'll move it one time to the right. And of course, we'll have to fill with a 0 because we've created a gap there now. So let's move all of this now off to the side. I'll rewrite the problem and make it look nicer before we go ahead and start doing our division here. So we've got 4,890 divided by 163. Let's divide. 163 does not go into 4. It does not go into 48, but it does go into 489. How many times? 3 times. 163 times 3 is 489 exactly. So we now have a remainder of 0 already. But we have to keep dividing until you get to the decimal point. Jennifer's car does a little bit better than 3 miles to the gallon. So let's keep dividing. Let's bring the 0 down. And now our remainder, and that 0 is just 0. So how many times does 163 go into 0? 0 times. So there's our answer, 30. Jennifer's car gets 30 miles per gallon. Congratulations! You've learned how to divide decimals and integers by decimals.